Will this be Leonard Hamilton's last season in Tallahassee?
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into Locked On Seminoles. I am your host. Thank you for making this your first listen each and every day. Truly appreciate you stopping in to talk some Noles with me. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. I wanted to start covering Florida State basketball a little bit, and it's for a couple of reasons. Number one, Leonard Hamilton has always been one of my favorite college basketball coaches, and this, quite honestly, could be his last season. Hard to say. Things can change in a moment. But with that stated, I want to give an overview of my basketball background. I did grow up in Indiana, where it's kind of crazy, and why I think Leonard Hamilton is one of the best coaches of the last 30 or 40 years. I also want to give a little bit of a snippet of the schedule for the Noles and a few of their key players. I want to learn osmosis and not try to just forge it and say that I know a ton about Florida State basketball. I watched a little bit last year, but they weren't very good with a 17-16 record, 10-10 in the ACC, and basketball was never my focus. I'm going to broaden a little bit this year. So here is my overview for the Noles. Number one, let's talk about Hamilton as a coach, why I respect him. Growing up in Indiana, Gene Cady, Bob Knight, the Big Ten, Dr. Tom Davis, different people that I watched. Defense was key. Obviously, if you followed FSU basketball at all, you know that Leonard Hamilton is somebody that takes that very seriously. So it's a like circumstance to me. There are a lot of people that really take it for granted how hard it is to teach defense. But he did something different that always caught my attention and gained my respect. He would take a raw player that somebody like North Carolina or Duke or UCLA or Michigan, Ohio State, whatever, would have passed on, coached him up, and then as a redshirt sophomore or whatever, he's averaging 8 points, 6 boards, and 2 blocks. That role player defensively underneath the basket that was annoying because he is 6'9", 6'10". That would be the shortest guy like that. They always had the biggest lineup, but he still got him to break down and move away from the bucket too. It wasn't just that Leonard Hamilton's teams could play defense in the paint or at least close to it. They would play 15-foot extended with several, not all, but several of their big men. And this is hard. Breaking down when you're a long-limbed guy like that, charging out on a switch to a 2-guard or a wing forward is not friendly. They always found a way to get a hand up. And it's ironic. I was going through photos this morning of Leonard Hamilton. There's a great shot of him on just the edge of the photo. There's a guy for Florida State playing defense getting a hand up on a jump shooter. And Leonard's in the background like this. Just get your hands up. Like he's just such a fundamental, just incredibly consistent coach with what he wanted. And he got his guys to do it. The only thing that I regret about Hamilton's career, specifically to Florida State too, is that the COVID year happened to hit when he had his best team. They might have won the national title that year. They really might have. They were 26-5. They were the best team in the Atlantic Coast Conference, and it just didn't work out. Sometimes that happens. I mean, that team was really good. I don't know what you can do about that. Just looking at the stats, I mean, they might have been the best team in college basketball. You could certainly make an argument for it. They were towards the top anyway, and he didn't get his chance. The next year they were good, but wasn't quite the same. Anyway, that's disappointing. But I've always respected Hamilton as a coach, and he's been around a lot of great programs. He started Austin Peay, then he went to Kentucky, got a big break, went to Oklahoma State. He's been around great programs, and he knows what it looks like. Then he took it to Miami. When Miami stopped, he went to Coach Jordan for a year up there in Washington. Then he came to Florida State, and he's been in Tallahassee over 20 years. Florida State fans probably take it for granted, and myself included, that Leonard Hamilton has been there that long and has been such a respectable coach on and off the basketball court, but it shouldn't be. A lot of programs go through basketball coaches like water, and it is not an easy endeavor for any athletic department to just go out and grab somebody. Oh, we're just going to get this guy and we're going to continue to roll on. Think about how long he's been in basketball. It's roughly 50 years. It's a long time. That's a respectable man that has done an incredible job at multiple institutions, and he deserves a lot of credit. Now, before I go into the next part, there is one thing that needs to be discussed about this regarding Hamilton. Again, will this be his last year? That's kind of the theme of this. I don't know, and that's why this part right here is vital. Florida State has all the issues going on with the Atlantic Coast Conference. That's well documented. I hate talking about it because it is just legal jargon that I despise. It is posturing by the ACC saying, oh, you can't do this. I can't believe you would say that. It's just posturing by high-priced lawyers in political theater. It's all it is. That being stated, it's still money for coaches, for players, for all the facilities and everything. That's why they want out of the league. The ACC is not holding their end of the bargain, according to the Noles. Kind of hard to argue. Clemson feels the same, and I'm guessing some other schools do too. But with Norvell not exactly doing well, I don't know how that contract's going to play out because he's owed over $60 million. They got a lot of big decisions to make. If they do part ways with Leonard Hamilton, and I assume it would be in a very friendly manner after this year, what would be the scenario for Florida State basketball? Do you hire somebody from within? Do you hire somebody that's played and or coached at Florida State? And of course, again, there's just no shortcut around this. What is the price tag? Florida State is not, whether we want to hear it or not, in the most advantageous position as an overall athletic department right now. Do I want to see the next head coach at Florida State, whether after this year or the year after, whatever, be a really good one? Of course. But what's the price tag? Are they going to be in the big boy market trying to take somebody? Or are they going to be, okay, we're going to take somebody that at least has ties to the state of Florida and or Florida State University, but they're not going to pay as much? I think there's got to be at least a discussion about it, because right now Florida State football, and it's always going to be the featured sport at this institution, is terrible. So you have to be honest with yourself, whether you want to eat it or not. The booster money is going to dry up if they start poorly next year. I mean, we got to finish this season first. I get it, but they're awful. They're going to not go to a bowl, etc. How do you plan for that as an athletic department? Because that plays into what you spend on everything: track, basketball, baseball, everything. Football could be on the hook for somebody $50+ million that's not even coaching after next season. I don't think Norvell has much of any chance to get fired after this year. But after next year, if they're poor again, I think there's a really high percentage chance he gets canned. But then, you're paying for a new basketball coach too. This stuff is complex. So that's something to think about. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about the schedule, a little bit about the roster for Florida State, and how Leonard Hamilton can kind of go out on a good note if this is indeed his last season in Tallahassee. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with the big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Will Florida State improve on last year? Well, that's to be determined, but after losing literally 10 players, I would not think that's a guarantee. I have a lot of questions about that, and it starts with this. How motivated will this team be besides some of the obvious players? Like if you have Watkins out there on the court, that's one guy is serious. He's as good an all-around player as there is in the Atlantic Coast Conference. Florida State's honestly lucky to have him back. He tested the waters in the portal and with the NBA draft. He is now back in Tallahassee, and if they didn't have him, they probably would be the worst team in the league. Just kind of looking through like what they have coming back, it'd be hard. They have a handful of freshmen and stuff. I'll go over those guys sometime this weekend or maybe early next week, but they needed Jamir Watkins back, and he is. So 6'7", 210, played over 28 minutes a game last year. This is a basketball player that you can put on the other team's best wing player, whether it's a guard or a forward. He can bang underneath the boards. He can handle the ball well, takes pretty good shots. I mean, his field goal percentage last year for an athlete like him, I was a little surprised. This is the most important to me thing that Jamir did. Shoot the ball with intelligence. His field goal percentage is 45.7%. So he's got a good stroke, but you still don't get to that percentage if you're a guy that hustles and plays D as much as he does, which means burning calories. You're tired, your arms and everything are really working, unless you're making sensible plays at the rim, know when to pass, and quite honestly, let it fly. So Jamir is a guy offensively that's good, but it's probably his defense that's most important. As I noted at the beginning of the show, Leonard Hamilton doesn't suffer fools. If you do not want to play D, the bench is right over here. You can have a seat next to me and my assistant coaching staff. This guy can guard a lot of different players. And if Florida State's going to have any chance to beat an upper echelon ACC team, have any chance to make a run at getting to the NCAA tournament, anything of that nature, what Watkins and his defensive effort represent needs to be taken in and replicated, at least in effort. I'm not necessarily saying in result, by the other Noles. They got a bunch of new guys. I'm not really going to get into that today. You don't know how the chemistry is going to be. But if your leader's as good as Watkins at just playing the game on both ends of the court, you at least have some semblance of a chance. I'm not saying it's perfect, but when you got a guy, again, that shoots 45.7%, but he's your best defensive guy, if that doesn't motivate you as one of the other guys, whether you're starting or off the bench, first-year guy, returning player, I don't care. Should you be playing major college basketball? You need to have motivation to want to play with guys like that, to want to play with elite players. Here are a few of the other stats last year for Jamir. These are just baseline, but 15.6 points per game, 6 boards, 2.8 assists. So those are your straightforward stats. Here's a number, again, that kind of goes with the field goal percentage that I think is key. Jamir's going to be getting the ball a lot. And if you're in a close game in the last 4 minutes, you prefer your best players to be able to knock them down. Well, he obviously can shoot. More importantly, especially if you have a lead, the other team doesn't want him to have the basketball. 79.5% from the charity stripe. So clutch to have a guy that's a bigger bodied player and not just the point guard and the shooting guard who can hit free throws. You're not going to win basketball games if you can't hit free throws against quality competition. I know it's boring, but if you're not a good free throw shooting team, it's probably going to cost you multiple games during any season. I don't care if it's high school, college, or pro, international, American, it doesn't matter. You've got to knock them down from the charity stripe. Also for him, I think the 28.2 minutes is about right. I'd like to see him at that again this year. I will be shocked, however, if he's not 30 to 31 minutes, maybe even higher. Brand new roster, you lost 10 guys. There might be a few games he plays 36, 37 minutes. Florida State's just not the deepest team, again, until otherwise proven, because of the chemistry factor. Do they have the right guys? We have no idea. And I've read previews and I've studied a little film and all that. I mean, you got a junior college player that's coming in that could be a key guy underneath, etc. You have no clue. So at some point, I expect at least a couple of times Watkins to play 35 plus minutes. 36, 37 is not out of the question. His points per game and all that may not go up much, but his defensive effort and just leadership on the court will be needed in terms of time spent on the hardwood. That's just my opinion. We'll see if I'm right. Chandler Jackson. This is an intriguing player to me because he is the definition of a Leonard Hamilton guard, big body guy, looks like a outside receiver, almost kind of like Hakeem. He's slightly taller, but that's a guy that could take the next step. I mean, athletically, he has what you want, but here are his numbers. Chandler last year at 6'5", 205, 14 and a half minutes per game. Pretty good shooter, 44.6%, 4.9 points per game, only 1.4 rebounds. For a guy as strong as him, I was a little surprised by that. That needs to go up. 1.1 assists. He's more of a slasher scorer in terms of his style, but 1.1 assists needs to go up as well. The one major concern, 29 28.3% from behind the arc. I get it that you want to get to the rack. I get it. You want to be physical. No guard can shoot below 30% from the arc and be efficient. That has to change. But here's why it's wild. Remember me mentioning Watkins being a good free throw shooter? Jackson shoots 80.6%. Like, how is that possible? And then you're below 30 from behind the three-point line. That tells me at least one of two things is true. Poor shot selection from downtown, and or there's something going on above the shoulders. Like, you can shoot if you're shooting over 86 or 80% from the line. Why aren't you hitting at least 35% from behind the arc? Minimum. This is a guy based on this free throw percentage might push 40% if he takes the right kind of shots. Just throwing that out there. Next, and this is a guy that really fits the profile of Leonard Hamilton historically. Taylor Bol Bowen, 6'10", 195. I hope that number has gone up in terms of weight. Only played about 11 minutes a game last year. That number might be 25 this year. Who knows? But 3.1 points, 2.6 boards, 0.3 assists, averaged 0.5 blocks per contest, 46.3% field goal, and he hit 2/3 of his free throws. Can he handle at least 18, 20 minutes a game? What's his stamina? Has he added the mass and strength to bang more consistently, to play on the block, play behind a guy, play three quarters, whatever it is that Hamilton and his staff ask? I don't know. Basketball is a really unique sport with big guys like that. The comfort with how they carry the weight is important, and that's personal. But I know 195 pounds at 6'10" is a toothpick. He needs to add weight, and again, that's an old stat in terms of his weight, but I'm hoping that he's a little bit bigger. Finally, Malik Ewin, 6'10", 220. This is the JC kid. He was at Ole Miss originally, ends up at junior college. Last year, he had a couple of games back-to-back over 30 points per game, so he can put it in the bucket. 14.9, 9 boards, and 2.7 blocks last year at South Plains JC. His last recorded weight that I saw was at 220. He's probably closer to 240 now. That's a couple of years ago. I'm really curious to see how they use him, how Malik adapts to being in Tallahassee. Can't teach the size and athleticism, but how does he get along with Jamir? How does he get along with Leonard and all that in critical moments? Nobody knows. There's no data point. Can't teach that talent, though. And if you like him and Bowen, if they both play well, you could have kind of a traditional under Leonard Hamilton front line at Florida State. Maybe they're still terrible because they don't have enough guard play. Maybe if they have one injury, it corrodes everything. I don't know. But looking at the big men underneath, athletically, the length, everything, it kind of fits what Leonard Hamilton does best. And his staff has been tremendous with it. They probably don't get enough credit. I'm really, really curious to see how that develops. When we come back, I'm going to talk a little bit about college basketball overall in my upbringing with basketball. That is next on Locked On Seminoles. All right. Have you downloaded Prize Picks yet? It's a pretty cool app. All you got to do is get involved with it. It's not your typical kind of deal with picking games and all that. It's more about player stats, 2 to 6 picks. That's what Prize Picks is really all about. Number one, you can get into this by getting 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 picks. So it's not like you've got to pick some kind of parlay that's just outrageous. You can do it pretty well with fewer than that. So again, you're picking player stats, not games. That's something to think about. So sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's a pretty good deal. You don't even have to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. If you think Justin Jefferson will get more than 83.5 yards next week, Christian McCaffrey is going to be at 75.5 yards, check it out. Put your money where your mouth is. Cook up hot takes with your friends and find the real money this football season when you run your game with Prize Picks. So again, like Justin Jefferson's an easy one to use, 83.5 yards over. You think that Joe Burrow is going to be below 2.5 touchdown passes this week. That's something you can go with, and you can do that across the board. You can pick defensive stats. You can pick offensive stats. It's up to you. So download the app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. College basketball has changed dramatically over the last 30 years. To me, the last great season of college basketball was 1993. Why? That was the year Chris Webber and the Fab Five went to the Final Four and played in North Carolina, ended up losing in that close game where Webber called the timeout and all that. Well, that was the last year that the great players didn't just turn pro after 1 year. After that, it was just totally different. The big ticket in 95 was the first player off the board as a high school guy. I think he went like number 5 or something like that, whatever it was, number 7. Then everybody just started turning pro out of high school, etc. It changed everything in college basketball. There's no continuity. Leonard Hamilton found a way, as I noted just a little bit ago. He's always found under the radar guys and coached them up. And that's kind of what I knew when I was growing up. Gene Cady did that at Purdue. Bob Knight obviously had some really good players like Isaiah Thomas and stuff. But by and large, he took a lot of the guys that he didn't have to buy. He wouldn't cheat like a lot of the other programs. And he coached guys up and he won with defense, smart passing, and excellent shooting. Well, Leonard Hamilton's a little bit different. Offensively, I don't think he's as good as Coach as Knight, but I don't know if anybody was. He's just a guy that found a way to always maximize. And that's why I find following Florida State, and I've ironically followed their basketball program for a very long time, since the late 2000s, because I always believed they had a chance in every game because of him on the sideline. I always thought it was kind of funny when he left Miami because I thought he was a pretty good coach then, but that's another story. So my background growing up in Indiana, I grew up in the same county where the movie Hoosiers was filmed, literally like the gyms that it was filmed in. I was familiar with, drove by, played in, etc. And basketball was everything. The first high school basketball game that I ever went to, literally, was a basketball game in the Newcastle Chrysler Fieldhouse, the town I grew up in. There were nearly 10,000 people there. Again, not an exaggeration. It's the largest high school gym in the world. They had extra bleachers on top of the concourse where they had a track because it was a big basketball weekend. Steve Alford, who's basketball coach, several different places, UCLA, etc., Iowa. He was eventually the Mr. Basketball that year. They were playing back-to-back games that weekend that I went to. The guys that ended up being runner-up in the third pick for Mr. Basketball were playing at Newcastle. It was just what I thought basketball was everywhere. Of course, I was wrong. I later went to a basketball game in Ohio, and I'm like, where is everybody? But basketball is in my blood. It's one of the first sports that I really loved. It's just that once college basketball, and I loved college basketball, went away and everybody started going pro, I lost a lot of interest in it. Doesn't mean I don't like it, but it's just not the same to me. There's no year-to-year chemistry with rosters. There's no year-to-year getting to know more about players. So that's why I focus more on coaches. Leonard Hamilton, well, he doesn't change a whole lot. This is who I am. This is how I coach. This is what I believe in, and we're going to be a disciplined basketball team. He's proven that throughout his career. So Leonard Hamilton, by the way, just for the sake of record, at Florida State, 443 and 281, that's 61.2%. In the Atlantic Coast Conference, he's 203 and 178, that's 53.3%. He's taken Florida State basketball to heights that it didn't consistently reach. And again, depending on how things would have played out, they might have got a ring in 2020, unfortunately for COVID. So that's truly unfortunate. But I will be covering Florida State basketball this year. I'm really curious to see how it blends with everything that's going on in the athletic department. That is certainly one of the reasons I want to cover it, because if it's obvious that Leonard's going to leave or if there's any announcement one way or the other, and I have no insight to that, I'm curious to see how they handle it. They got a lot of big checks they're going to have to write, whether they want to admit it or not, with the settlement, potentially at some point, with the ACC, or whether they win the court case. I have no idea what's going to happen with that, but they have to plan, the Florida State administration and boosters, like it's not going to go well. And they also have to plan, whether you want to hear it or not, that Mike Norvell needs to go after next year. They can deny all they want. They're terrible, and he's the guy that got them there. Fair or not, he's the leader of the program, and they stink. So that's a lot of money. Last I checked, that contract again was over $60 million. That buyout is not going to be friendly. I don't know exactly where it's at, but it's ugly. So Florida State basketball is in a little bit of flux. So is the athletic department in Tallahassee. It's going to be interesting. Please like this show. Please hit that subscribe button and hit the notification bell if you have not already. I truly appreciate you stopping in to talk some Noles with me. It's been a lot of fun today, and I will be back later today with the show tonight with my traditional football stuff. Going to talk about Florida State and Miami. Going to give a little more detail on what I expect from the game. Just kind of some overviews and whatnot. Florida State, I don't expect to win, but there are some gaining points. Things they need to do to get better in this game, especially with the offense. I'm going to talk about that tonight on Locked On Seminoles. Next, check out Alex Dono and Kenton Gibbs over at Locked On ACC. Everybody have a good one. I will talk to you again very soon.